Welcome to The Plunge with Holser. Derek Holser, Esquire here, retired. So glad to be with you today. Thank you for your support and encouragement as we continue to cultivate meaningful conversations at the intersection of theology, philosophy, and culture. We're beginning a new series today with a simple introduction. This series will span the course of 12 weeks with a new episode each Friday. Our series is featuring the life of Owen Barfield, known as the First and Last Inkling. Owen Barfield was close colleagues with people who are now household names, such as C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. And for some reason, I don't know if you're like me, I've always been fascinated by the influences that influence us. In other words, we've all been influenced to some degree by the works of Lewis and Tolkien in particular, especially their fiction, which is quite prominent over the last 50 to 70 years. But I'm curious about who influenced them, aren't you? And the ideas that were fomented in the conversations and correspondence between the entire group of people who call themselves and are called by historians as the Inklings. And so this series is going to feature someone who is just as profound, maybe more so, than Lewis and Tolkien, and yet is not nearly as well known, in the hopes that many more people will come to explore the work of Owen Barfield. So welcome to The Plunge. So glad you're here. Let's dive in. Owen Barfield was born in 1898 and he lived until 1997. He was a British author, philosopher, and one of the prominent figures in the development of anthroposophy, a spiritual philosophy founded by Rudolf Steiner. Barfield's intellectual journey spanned the realms of philosophy, literature, language, and consciousness. He is best known for his work in the philosophy of language, especially his ideas on the evolution of human consciousness. In fact, he coined the term the evolution of consciousness. This evolution is reflected in language, art, and culture. Barfield was also closely associated, as previously mentioned, with the literary group known as the Inklings, which included such figures as C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, and Charles Williams. Barfield's career was defined by his explorations into the nature of reality and human perception. He emphasized the role of language in shaping our understanding of the world. Throughout his life, he strived to integrate mystical and rational perspectives, creating a unique philosophical system that influence both academic philosophy and spiritual movements. This introduction will explore his life, his major works, and his lasting influence on philosophy, literature, and spiritual thought. As mentioned, Barfield was born in 1898 on November 9th in London, England. His father, Edward, was a solicitor in the firm Barfield and Barfield. His mother, Edith, was a writer and social reformer. Barfield's early years were marked by a deep interest in literature, which was fostered by his mother's love for reading and writing. He attended Highgate School in London, where he developed a love for poetry and philosophy. At school, Barfield was influenced by the work of poets such as Samuel Taylor Coleridge, whose romanticism would later inform his philosophical ideas. In 1919, Barfield entered Oxford University, where he eventually earned a bachelor's and a master's in English language and literature, as well as a law degree. It was during his first semester at Oxford that he met C.S. Lewis, who was also in his first semester. Two freshman college students, they would become the closest of friends, as well as intellectual companions for many years. Owen Barfield lived in the Oxford area for 14 years after his first degree, mostly in the village of Long Crendon, where C.S. Lewis was a frequent visitor. Thereafter, he kept a house to return, as they often did. As a philologist, he had much in common with Tolkien, who he met in 1926, introduced by his good friend C.S. Lewis. In 1935, Barfield began to work as a solicitor in London, but his interest in literature and spirituality continued to dominate his life. He eventually left the law practice in 1959 at the age of 60 to focus on writing and philosophical inquiry. I can relate to that. Barfield's connection to the Inklings, a literary group formed in Oxford during the 1930s, was one of the most significant aspects of his early intellectual life. The Inklings were an informal group of writers and scholars who gathered regularly to discuss their work and ideas. The group's members shared an interest in myth, literature, and Christian spirituality, and their conversations often delved into issues of language, the imagination, and the nature of reality. Barfield's friendship with Lewis was central to his own intellectual development, although their views on spirituality and religion eventually diverged. The disagreement that they had was known as the Great War between Barfield and Lewis, and it went from 1922 to about 1930. It concerned imagination and truth. Barfield was instrumental in helping C.S. Lewis shift from an atheist to a theistic position on the universe. These two men shared a deep interest in the evolution of human consciousness and the role of language in shaping our perception of the world. Barfield was particularly influenced by Lewis's writings on myth and Christianity, which led him to explore the connections between language, myth, and reality. Barfield's early philosophical influences included the German philosopher Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, whose work on perception and the nature of reality had a profound impact on him. Goethe's approach to understanding the world through both scientific and artistic lenses resonated with Barfield, who was interested in integrating the rational and the intuitive. Another key influence was the work of Rudolf Steiner, the founder of anthroposophy, a spiritual philosophy that emphasizes the importance of spiritual science and the development of higher consciousness. Barfield's association with anthroposophy would mark a significant turn in his intellectual journey. Barfield studied Steiner's writings, which focused on topics such as the nature of the soul, the development of human consciousness, and the role of spiritual beings in shaping the material world. Barfield met Rudolf Steiner in 1923 in London, and quickly became a founding father of the Association for Anthroposophy. He also wrote its forming articles, and from 1930 to 1976 he was a very active and formative committee member, nearly 50 years of service to the development and cultivation of anthroposophy. Rudolf Steiner was the founder of the Waldorf School, and Barfield taught at the Waldorf School in the English-speaking world and even wrote a short story for his pupils. One of Barfield's key contributions to anthroposophy was his development of the conception of semantic freedom, which is the idea that language is not simply a tool for describing the world, but is also a key factor in shaping our understanding of reality itself. According to Barfield, language reflects the evolution of human consciousness, and by studying the history of language, we can gain insight into the ways in which human perception and awareness have developed over time. This idea formed the basis for much of Barfield's later work and was a central theme in his philosophy of language. Barfield's work in the philosophy of language and consciousness is perhaps his most enduring contribution to intellectual history. In his book, Poetic Diction, published in 1928, Barfield explored the evolution of meaning in language. He argued that the way we use words reflects changes in human consciousness over time. Barfield's central thesis was that early human consciousness was more participatory in nature, meaning that people experienced the world in a direct, imaginative way. Barfield stated that during this time in human evolution, there was a change in the nature of humanity's relationship with the divine. As time passed, however, language became more abstract and disconnected from the immediate experience of the world. This reflected a shift in human consciousness towards a more intellectual, rational mode of perception. Barfield traced this shift in consciousness through the history of language. He showed how words that once carried vivid, imaginative meanings became more abstract and detached from their original sensory experiences. Barfield used the example of the word tree, which in early language carried a rich symbolic meaning, to illustrate his point. Over time, however, the word tree became a mere label for an object, and its original symbolic significance was lost. According to Barfield, this shift in language mirrored the broader shift in human consciousness, from a participatory, imaginative way of experiencing the world to a more intellectual, conceptual mode of thought. In his later works, such as The Rediscovery of Meaning, published in 1977, and Saving the Appearances, published 20 years earlier in 1957, Barfield continued to develop his ideas about the evolution of consciousness and the role of language in shaping human experience. He argued that modern consciousness, which tends to view the world in an objective, detached manner, was a result of a long process of historical development. However, Barfield believed that the intellectual, rational mode of consciousness that dominated the modern world was not the final stage in human evolution. He suggested that humanity could rediscover a more participatory, imaginative way of experiencing the world, one that would allow for a deeper connection to the spiritual dimensions of reality. Barfield's philosophy of language and consciousness had a profound impact on thinkers in a variety of fields, including philosophy, linguistics, theology, and the arts. His work provided a framework for understanding the relationship between language, thought, and perception. In his later years, Barfield continued to write and lecture on his philosophical ideas, and he remained active in the anthroposophical community. He also maintained close relationships with other members of the Inklings, particularly C.S. Lewis, with whom he exchanged many letters and ideas throughout their lives. Although Barfield's views on spirituality and religion differed from those of Lewis, they remained friends until Lewis's death in 1963, a great example for us today. Barfield's legacy is multifaceted. In addition to his contributions to philosophy and language, he also had a significant impact on literature and the arts. His work on the evolution of consciousness and the role of imagination in human experience influenced a wide range of writers, artists, and thinkers, including Tolkien, who incorporated some of Barfield's ideas into his own writing, particularly in relation to language and myth. Barfield's influence can also be seen in the field of education, particularly in the Waldorf schools, which are based on, again, Steiner's educational philosophy. Barfield's emphasis on the development of imaginative and spiritual consciousness resonated with the principles of Waldorf education, which seeks to cultivate the whole child, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. Barfield continued to write and lecture into his 90s, and he remained a deeply thoughtful and engaged philosopher until his passing in 1997 at the age of 99. His ideas continue to inspire thinkers, writers, and educators who seek to understand the deep connection between language, thought, and the spiritual dimension of reality. I personally believe that Barfield is a person whose time is still yet coming, as his voice grows ever more important in the day and age in which we live. This series will explore not only his major works and his contributions to philosophy, literature, arts, and education, but we'll also dive into his fiction, in particular his work The Silver Trumpet, a fairy tale which may lay the groundwork for all of the Inklings fairy tales in some ways, as well as his work Eager Spring on care and nurture of our relationship with the environment. We have 10 fantastic guests joining me for this series. I'm so excited to bring them all to the plunge. Thank you again. I hope you enjoy all the great conversations to come on the luminous and truly legendary Owen Barfield. Today's episode of The Plunge is sponsored by the word anthroposophy. Anthroposophy. A-N-T-H-R-O-P-O-S-O-P-H-Y. That'll win you a spelling bee. Anthroposophy is a formal educational, therapeutic, and creative system established by Rudolf Steiner, seeking to use mainly natural means to optimize physical and mental health and well-being. Sounds like something we could use more of. It supports the idea that there's an existence of an objective, intellectually comprehensible spiritual world, and that's accessible through our human experience. I don't think there'd be a ton of disagreement among the audience on that point. But followers of anthroposophy aim to engage in spiritual discovery through a mode of thought independent of sensory experience. Though proponents claim to present their ideas in a manner that is verifiable by rational discourse, and say they seek precision and clarity comparable to that obtained by scientists investigating the physical world, many of these ideas have been termed pseudoscientific. So we've got some controversy over anthroposophy. And of course, the plunge is never one to shy away from controversial topics, for it is in that friction that we might discover more than we had bargained for. The word anthroposophy comes from the combination of anthropo, Greek, and Sophia, wisdom. Of course, human wisdom, right? Get out there, experience some things. Let me know if you discover new meaning and purpose or insight through your day-to-day meditation, walks in the woods, or cultivating your garden in the backyard. Whatever you do, I hope you have a great one. Much gratitude to Anthroposophy for sponsoring today's episode of The Plunge.